Today is the 13th of October, 2015, and the topic is Ronald Reagan and the nuclear arms race, 1980 to 1988. And my guest is Jeff Risner, member of the Athens City Council, part-time geographer, expert on computers, and I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University. And this is the Athens Speakout, number 349.
Robert, it's the 20th. It's October 20th.
October 20th? Yes, that's true. Thank you very much. I'm a week behind. I didn't update my calendar. But I had 20th on the outside of the cover, and I had 13th on the inside. That's what happens when you're 85. I apologize. Okay, I'll have another warning here. This title might seem a little too long. Please stop me and jump right into Ronald Reagan and his Star Wars plans. But I'm going to begin back a little bit earlier with a little bit of history. And last month, we had several discussions of the complex Middle East policy and Latin American policy of Ronald Reagan. And this is a TV show that's been going on about Ronald Reagan for 4 or 5 sessions. And the nuclear arms race is hopefully the last topic. And we'll have nothing more to say about Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan came into office in 1980, he made a promise that he would win the Cold War. And there are some people who still believe that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War, even at this late date. But I think the term Cold War is only a metaphor invented by a famous journalist, Walter Lippmann, and an investment banker by the name of Bernard Baruch, and they invented this term together in 1947. And Ronald Reagan's proposal to win the Cold War in 1980 was impossible, because there is no such concept as the Cold War. As a strategy for military action, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, back in 1946, and the United States ambassador to Soviet Union in 1946 by the name of George Kennan, both of those men didn't talk about the Cold War, or if they did, it was very seldom. They bypassed the attempt of the Soviet Union to spread the communist ideology. And that ideology, over a 10-year period, 20-year period, or 30-year period, went on, and both Churchill and Kennan used a diplomatic phrase called the containment of the Soviet Union. And that is a real strategy. And I think that George Kennan lived to be 101 years old, and he saw the Soviet Union collapse in 1991. And gradually, the term Cold War is disappearing from the American television show. So behind this imaginary line called the Iron Curtain, which Winston Churchill invented, this so-called Iron Curtain went from Stettin, a German city on the Baltic, due south to Trieste, a Yugoslav city.
On the Adriatic.
On the Adriatic, correct. And Churchill implied that there were slave states behind the Iron Curtain. They were captive of the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia was on the borderline, and they got involved in the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, and Tito developed his own brand of communism. Well, that was one incident in the so-called Cold War. So anyway, both Kennan and Churchill said you have to use conventional weapons. The only way to stop Stalin behind the Iron Curtain is to use conventional weapons and convince Stalin that he can't invade France, and he can't invade Spain, and he can't take Western Europe. And that all worked over the long period of time. Now, there was a famous place called Checkpoint Charlie. The Iron Curtain was not really iron. It was a barbed wire fence, and there were lots of gates in and out over the 40, 50-year period that we're talking about. And I went to West Germany myself in the American Army. And one of the interesting experiences I had in 1955 at age 25 is that I did a lot of hitchhiking around in West Germany. And I got into a car with a 14-year-old kid who was a hitchhiker. And believe it or not, he told me that he hitchhiked from West Germany to Moscow on Soviet trucks. He came back on Soviet trucks. Oh, the so-called Iron Curtain was a lot of nonsense.
A little more porous than that.
A little more porous than that. And then I met another West German back in the 60s, a little bit later. I went back there, did some research. And I got in a train somewhere around Cologne in West Germany. And my partner was an old lady, over 65. And she was teaching philosophy in East Germany. And she was visiting all of her relatives in the Cologne, Western German area. I said, well, how is it that the East German police state allows you to visit them for Christmas and go back? How do they know you won't defect? She had an answer for me. She said, well, I have a son who's about 25, 30 years old, and he's serving in the East German Merchant Marine, and if I don't go back, he's going to pay a penalty. So it's another example of the porous Iron Curtain. So I learned a little bit about the reality of East-West conflict by being a traveler. And travel helps teach history. Anyway, she didn't want a retaliation, so that was an interesting experience.
Now, Robert, there is a wall there in Berlin, right?
Berlin, yes.
Okay.
And I went through that so-called wall in 1983, before the wall came down.
The wall wasn't built until 61.
Really?
Yeah, the wall was built in 61.
It was just, like you said, it was just barbed wire. It was a very
It
porous.
was barbed wire in 45.
Yeah.
Wow.
But Checkpoint Charlie was both a wall and a piece of barbed wire.
We've all seen that famous photo of the guy, of the German soldier jumping over the...
That's after the wall was constructed.
Yeah, 89.
Yeah.
89.
Well, no, that was long.
Oh, you mean he climbed up in the 60s over the wall
It shows him. Do you remember?
with a ladder?
Right. When they built the wall, it didn't take it very long. Essentially, they just closed off streets, and buildings became part of the wall.
Oh, okay.
And then they augmented it as time went on. But
Yeah.
the initial thing was they just simply strung barbed wire, and they just said, no,
Yeah.
you can't cross over now.
I think he jumped prior
Yeah.
to the wall. Wasn't that showed him
Right.
jumping over barbed wire? Yeah. At the time.
Yeah.
Famous photograph.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in 1961, when they put this wall up, I was at the University of Michigan. I was working on my PhD. I hadn't finished it yet. But I had a history student who was about, well, she might have been getting her BA. And she was frightened. She says, it looks like we're going to have World War III. I said, forget about it. I said, they're building the wall on East German territory.
Yeah.
They're not advancing.
No.
Stalin's afraid to advance. Forget about it. Or Khrushchev. But Khrushchev was dead. Stalin was dead. He died in 53. So these students are still living in the past, still thinking that Stalin is still alive.
No. Khrushchev wasn't.
That's the difference between television and reality.
There is a difference.
There is a difference.
Anyway, carry on.
Anyway, here we are.
Yeah.
We're still talking about Ronald Reagan in 1980. He's going to win the Cold War. Impossible. And anyway, I want to talk about now, I think we can go forward here and talk about a real war. We might have a question one. I want to get Jeff into this. Why did Stalin and Truman refuse to use the nuclear bomb during the Korean War 1950 to 53? There's a real war.
Yeah, it was. And of course, there's a lot of Americans certainly egging on Truman to use nuclear weapons. Douglas MacArthur wanted to.
Well, he was a little cautious.
Yeah.
He said he wanted to bomb China.
Well.
But he didn't say use the nukes.
Well, no.
He wasn't that crazy.
No. There was, I think, several reasons why, both military and political and propaganda-wise and so on. One in particular was the United States had a very large advantage over the Soviet Union at that time in terms of nuclear weapons. Of course, in these days, nuclear weapons had to be delivered by bombers.
Yes, that's right.
So size and the number of weapons that you could actually deliver was rather limited. But the United States definitely did have an advantage. There was no question about it. We could bomb Moscow, but they could not bomb Washington with their bombers. That was absolutely impossible. So Stalin was cognizant of that. They didn't have, their nuclear arsenal had just started in 1949. That's when they tested their first atomic bomb.
That's right.
They had another thing that sort of, I think, had an effect on American planners was the Russians and the United States got into an arms race over the hydrogen bomb. When the Soviet Union detonated their first atomic bomb in 1949, it was a ground test, like the Americans did. We did a tower. But then they developed bombs where they could actually drop them out of airplanes. Well, now you have now you actually have a weapon. I mean, exploding a device on the ground is not a weapon. It doesn't do any good except blow up your own country. To have a weapon, it has to be delivered to the enemy. Well, the United States embarked on a hydrogen bomb program, and we did that in the South Pacific, and we detonated a hydrogen bomb in, I think, 1950. Well, it wasn't more than...
No, at 50, Truman authorized it.
Yeah.
But in 54, they had the bikini test.
No, but that came much later.
Yeah, much later.
But our first atomic hydrogen bomb test was either 50 or 51.
Where?
It was in the South Pacific, probably at Eniwetok Atoll. But it was not a bomb per se. It was a test of a concept. Could a fusion device work?
Okay.
Well, it did, but the thing was 6 stories high.
Okay.
So obviously, you can't put that in an airplane. Well, the Russians...
I forgot about that test.
well, the Russians were working on a hydrogen bomb ever since 1945, and they delivered a deliverable one that could be dropped out of an airplane in 1952. Okay, we didn't have one yet. So even though we say, well, we were the first to explode a hydrogen bomb, the Russians actually had one that they could drop on somebody.
In theory.
In theory. Okay. Well, so now you're looking at just different military options. So here you have Stalin and Truman. What is Stalin's end game in Korea? It's not World War III.
Right.
It is not to provoke the United States into an all-out invasion of the entire Korean Peninsula and parts of China. And of course, Russia is bordering there. So
they have a big port in Vladivostok.
Right. So that is not Stalin's intention. His intention was, one, get the United States involved in something in Asia, deflect attention out of Europe, where
that's right.
Where the real estate matters.
That's
Berlin matters.
That's right.
Germany matters.
That's right.
Eastern Europe matters.
Right.
Korea does not matter. Don't care.
That's right.
That's China, and really, he doesn't care about China either.
That's correct.
So whatever Mao does, if it ties Mao down for a couple of years fighting the United States, hey, that's okay.
Right.
That takes the pressure off my borders.
That's correct. You got it.
There was, and now Truman's end game. What's his end game? Is it to provoke World War III?
Nope.
Is it to start dropping atomic bombs all over Asia?
Nope.
Remember, we just did that to Japan.
That's
and who's our biggest ally now in Asia?
Right.
It's the Japanese.
Right.
And where does fallout go? It travels From Korea
Even
over
closer.
over to
If you put it on Pyongyang, it blows right back to Seoul.
that's right. So you
So
don't.
there's no target in Korea.
There's no strategic value to it. There's no tactical reason to do it. There's no strategic value. Politically, it would be extremely stupid.
Right.
So no, neither one. Stalin, he was getting a little senile towards the end, but he wasn't crazy.
No, he wasn't crazy.
No.
He was a clever Machiavellian.
Yes, he
And
was.
it was Eisenhower, I'm not Eisenhower, it was Stalin who was the first one who wanted a peace. And Eisenhower signed a truce in
Yeah.
July 1953. And it was South Korea and North Korea wanted to keep fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Stalin's MiGs were being shot down by the American jets.
Yeah.
Stalin says, well, he says to Mao, I'm not going to give you any more MiGs, they're expensive.
Yeah. What do you
If
pay?
you want to fight the war, you use your own land troops.
Right. Right.
So Stalin was just sitting in the Kremlin watching the stupid Chinese and the Americans kill themselves.
Yeah. Everything was fine.
So anyway, Mao Zedong finally gets the idea that his infantry, 1 million men, cannot get through a wall of howitzers along the DMZ.
No, and he finally figured out he was being played for a sucker. Yeah, so
And his own son died there.
yeah. Yeah.
So he said to North Korea, you better sign the truce.
Yeah. But Chou En-lai was never in favor of the Korean fiasco
Absolutely.
either. I mean,
Absolutely.
he had much more world smarts than.
So the Korean War was a real war, a limited war,
Yeah.
limited, confined to the Korean Peninsula.
Right.
And MacArthur made his mistakes in trying to say, let's go across the Yellow River.
That's right.
And Atchison and Truman and Bradley said, you got to fire that guy. And that's why MacArthur was fired.
Yeah.
And then they spent 2 years trying to make the DMZ was more or less solid.
Yeah.
And the DMZ is not too far from the 38th parallel.
No.
And eventually the North Koreans were forced by Mao to say, okay, sign the damn thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a real war. Not a Cold War. Well, the second real war was a long fight that began in Indochina in 1954 and ended in 54 to 75. And Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson thought they could win something in Vietnam. Unclear what they were going to win, but they were both ambitious to prove that they were going to stand firm. Stand firm in a swamp.
That's right.
Well, LBJ and
You don't want to look weak. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
anyway,
Same in,
LBJ
Iraq right now.
and Richard Nixon finally let the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese kill each other, and no nuclear weapons.
No.
That was even less hospitable for a
Right,
nuclear
right.
weapon.
No, that would not. Wouldn't go
You
over
couldn't
real
even use TNT on the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
No.
Okay, so I don't know what they were going to win, but it was in retrospect, it was funny.
Yeah.
We're laughing.
Well, it is.
But the GIs who went to Vietnam found it
No, it wasn't
a
funny at all.
Keystone Cop tragic thing.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. What did they lose? 35 million men? 38 million? How many men are on that wall?
Oh, 55,000.
55,000.
Yeah, 55, 58.
58.
58,000.
58,000.
Depends when you
I was
start.
gonna say, the big benefactors of the Vietnam War was the defense contractors.
Yes,
Just
money.
like they are now.
Absolutely.
And,
You got it.
A lot of Johnson's and Nixon's friends got rich.
Sure they did.
Funny how that worked out.
And Eisenhower warned them in 1960. Stop the military-industrial complex. You can build 1,000 hospitals. You can build 1,000 schools for this money you're wasting.
That's right.
So he decided that the missile mad thing was really mad. He had an arms, Eisenhower appointed an arms director.
Yes, he did.
Harold Stassen.
Harold Stassen.
And the real war proved to be a war of futility.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons why. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I guess that's enough on the lost cause of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
Now, Richard Nixon was better than Johnson because he hired Henry Kissinger to have a disguised retreat.
Yes.
Tell the Republican Party we're going to win it.
But we're leaving.
Yeah, we just gradually pull the troops out.
Yeah.
And by 1972, there were only 20,000 left.
Yeah,
And
over.
Kissinger makes a secret deal, which some Republicans have never gotten over.
No.
But it was humorous from the point of view
No,
of the Doves. The Doves won indirectly. Well, anyway, I think we're ready for a second question, unless you want to say anything more about those
No.
two real wars. The United States came out of Korea as a stalemate, and I think we have to admit that the Vietnam Project was a loser.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we lost that one.
Okay, question number 2, a little bit different. Can you explain the nuclear debate between Robert Oppenheimer and physicist Edward Teller?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. What was that all about?
Well, it's like everything else, complicated. Robert Oppenheimer was an American physicist, Jewish background,
Right.
who...
So was Teller Jewish. They're
yes,
both Jews.
But there's a distinct difference between the two.
Right.
Robert was born in New York,
Right.
but was extremely cultured.
Right.
During his boyhood, he spent time in France and Germany. He spoke 6 languages.
Right.
A genius by any definition of the word. He could read and write and speak Sanskrit.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's
so-
amazing. I do know that he was interested in Hindu.
Oh, yes. But he also was a nuclear physicist, and his forte was looking at the internal workings of stars and things. Well, okay, Second World War comes along. The Manhattan Project to develop an atomic bomb gets started, and the United States needs all the physicists that they can get a hold of. So Oppenheimer is dragged into it. He was at the University of California.
Yeah, Berkeley.
Then we had Ernest Lawrence from Berkeley.
Right.
Then Teller was from Hungary, but he was in the United States. Now, don't forget, Hungary is an Axis ally. Okay, it wasn't conquered by the Germans. They were a willing participant in the Axis.
Right.
So you have Teller, who technically is an enemy alien. Okay.
You're saying when he came to the United States?
Yes, but he was not yet an American citizen at that time.
Okay.
As was Enrico Fermi, who
Okay.
was at the University of Chicago, but he's an Italian.
Right.
Well, of course, Italy is at war with the United States too, so he is technically an enemy alien. But these men are so needed, they're so valuable, that it doesn't matter. I mean, they're put to work, and besides, they're not going to talk to anybody anyway.
That's right.
So Teller is working with Oppenheimer to develop, okay, theoretically, you know how to make a nuclear explosion. All you have to do is get enough fissionable material, break it in two, you'll start a reaction and it will explode. That doesn't make a weapon. Okay, that's not a bomb. That's just a physical phenomenon. How do you actually build and construct an atomic bomb? Nobody knew.
Okay.
It was a completely unknown territory. So the head of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves, looks out, who can we get a hold of? He's very impressed by Oppenheimer. I mean, it's complete opposite of each other. I mean, you wouldn't imagine these two people could even get along in the same room, let alone become close friends. But they did. Immediately he saw Oppenheimer. He said, I want you to get the very best scientists, and I want you to go and design an atomic bomb.
Right.
And he did. He did that at
Los
Los
Alamos,
Alamos, New
right.
Mexico.
Right.
Okay. Teller was very angry about that because he considered himself to be the man who should be running this thing and building an atomic bomb, because he had theoretically figured out how to construct a hydrogen bomb.
Yeah.
And he was the one who pointed out to Oppenheimer during these calculations that theoretically it was possible that if you detonate an atomic bomb, you could set the atmosphere on fire. We could have a chain reaction with the nitrogen in the atmosphere. That could just burn the entire world up. Well, Oppenheimer had a couple of really good grad students. They looked at his calculations, and they found he made a little mistake. And he never, ever forgave Oppenheimer for pointing that out. I mean, he was totally humiliated by that because he was going around bragging to the world, you can't do it because of this. And Oppenheimer's students come out and say, no, look, right here. You see this equation? You screwed that up. That's wrong. And here's Teller, who has this horrible ego about himself. These great eyebrows and ego just go hand in hand. And he was extremely jealous of Oppenheimer. And well, anyway, that started the animosity going. So after the war, Oppenheimer is he's no longer at Los Alamos. He's actually the person who is now directing the atomic bomb development for the United States, not Teller. Teller is going around arguing, hey, you need a hydrogen bomb. We've got to build a hydrogen bomb. Why do we need a hydrogen bomb? Well, because it's bigger. Well, so what? I mean, how many times can you blow up a city? I mean, why would you want to have a bomb that's 1,000 times more powerful than the one that blew up Hiroshima? For what purpose would that serve? Okay, you blow up a city and you destroy everything for a mile around. That's an atomic bomb. Drop a hydrogen bomb, you destroy everything for 100 miles around. That's better? I mean, what have I gained here? If I'm trying to conquer the country, I've blown it up. It's all gone. So you had a lot of people in the State Department, in the Defense Department, saying, God, we really don't need something like that. There's no point to it.
Right.
Well, he's busy arguing and on about this. So you had Oppenheimer and Teller arguing to different people about whether or not to continue this. Now, Oppenheimer was very much in favor of, look, we got to cut a deal with the Russians. The Russians don't have an atomic bomb right now, but they will get it. They're going to have one in 5 years, no question about it. They will have one by 1950. That was his prediction. He was wrong. They had it in 1949.
Okay.
Well, they had an advantage. They got all the secrets out of Los Alamos from Klaus Fuchs and a couple of other spies that were there.
Right.
So they had an advantage. They also had the advantage of knowing an atomic bomb can work because we've seen it work over Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
If we know it can work, then we can build one.
Right.
The Americans didn't have that advantage.
That's right.
Okay. We didn't know if it could even be built.
That's right.
So Oppenheimer said, now is the time. Let's cut the deal. Let's do something. Now Teller is going around, no. The Russians are now in charge of Hungary, my homeland. The communists are just as bad as the Nazis. No compromise. We must build up our arsenal. We need a hydrogen bomb. On and on, nagging. So that was essentially what you had between these two. And in the end, Teller won out.
Wait a minute, Teller won?
Eventually he did.
You mean because he got a hydrogen bomb?
He not only got a hydrogen bomb,
because Truman approved it.
No, the hydrogen bomb was approved by, yeah, that's right, it was Truman. I'm thinking Eisenhower. But no, the reason that I'm saying Teller won the argument was Oppenheimer was for nuclear disarmament. He was wanting a treaty that somehow be verifiable between us and the Russians or any other nuclear power that be coming along, where some sort of international United Nations Atomic Energy Commission would have control over all fissionable materials.
Right.
And they would monitor it. They would know the United States has made 100 pounds, the Russians have made 50. Okay, we know how much is here, how much is there. Okay, we know how much you're using and where it is. Okay, we know you can't be building atomic bombs because we've accounted for all of it. That was the idea. Maybe in 1949 it might have worked, 48. But after the first Russian atomic bomb went off, I mean, any chance of that just went out the window. The Russians just simply weren't interested. And then they come to find out that, okay, even if we can verify how much fissionable material the Russians have, we can't be absolutely certain that some of it isn't being siphoned off to make atomic weapons, because you don't really need that much. To make an atomic bomb, all I need is enough uranium or plutonium about the size of a grapefruit. And that'll do it. That'll make me one that'll blow up Hiroshima.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm getting up to 1950, 1954. Mm-hmm. You've given us a lot of technology about Teller, but I'm not too sure what he won. What did he win? What did he prove?
Okay, two things that he won. One, Oppenheimer was accused of security breaches.
Ah, he was fired.
And he was fired, and he lost his security equipment clearance, and therefore he could no longer have any influence with the
Right.
administration or the Atomic Energy Commission, who was
Okay.
technically, that was Glenn Seaborg who was over that.
Right.
So Teller now became the big advocate within the defense industry and department about the need to build up big and better nuclear weapons. So you had this debate that was going on. Do we need to develop a hydrogen bomb? Is there any point to it?
Okay, so they got a bomb, but
Yeah.
now where do we go from there? What are you going to do with the bomb?
That's just it. But the idea was, okay, we need this as a deterrent, or are we going to use it as an offensive weapon? That was never decided. But see, you don't need a policy out there in place to decide, are we going to manufacture atomic bombs? There was no decision not to manufacture atomic bombs. We were still making them.
But you keep talking about we.
Yeah,
I'm talking
United
about,
States.
Okay, there's a State Department.
Uh-huh.
There is an Atomic Energy Commission.
Uh-huh.
There is the Livermore Lab.
Yeah.
There's Los Alamos Lab. We're talking about a debate that went on in 4 different offices.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Eisenhower is president, right?
He would be by 52, right?
All right.
Okay.
Now, when we get to 1954, why was Oppenheimer taking why did he lose his security clearance? Why was he fired? And who fired him? And why?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
Station break.
Station break.
Because I'm on the side of Oppenheimer. And
I am too.
I think you've given too much energy to. Anyway, we got to have this station break.
Okay.
We're having a little discussion here about two physicists. They're both dead now, Oppenheimer and Teller. And Oppenheimer was the father of the successful atomic Los Alamos bombs that were used on Japan.
Yeah.
The hydrogen bomb is largely an unused theoretical weapon, and it's never been used on anybody. And fortunately, the United States and the Soviet Union has gradually demobilized these bombs.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I
Right.
just want to get back to what we were talking
okay.
about with Jeff Risner, my famous partner here from Athens County City Council.
Okay.
I got a question before you
Yeah, go ahead.
I used to drive by Lawrence Livermore Lab there, in Livermore, California. Who was Lawrence Livermore? Do you know? Was he a scientist or?
Well, it's Lawrence-Livermore. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Livermore, California.
Yeah.
Well, it's Livermore, California.
But it's
Yeah,
but it's
but-
Lawrence. Lawrence was a famous physicist.
Yeah,
Lawrence. Okay.
Ernest Lawrence was an American physicist who invented the cyclotron, which was a way of throwing neutrons around a circle controlled by a magnetic field, which would then impact on another atomic particle out there and split the atom.
I see.
Okay,
Wow.
and before that he won the Nobel Prize. Okay, so he's a Nobel Prize physicist. And he was probably one of the most influential of all the nuclear physicists or scientists of that time, because this was the age when scientists were now becoming important people enough to be advisors to people who made decisions. You know, up to that it was like bankers. Bankers and movie stars and people like that, those were your advisors. Okay, but now they were saying, well, you know, these are really incredibly complex issues. Let's get scientists in here and he was one of the big ones that did that. So, and he was a friend of Lawrence, of Oppenheimer too. They were a pair.
All right.
So, well, anyway, Lawrence, okay, Lawrence is okay, but Oppenheimer had problems with his past. He was a very liberal Democrat. His brother Frank was a communist, a member of the American Communist Party. Robert Oppenheimer's first big love in his life was a communist. She was a card-carrying member. He probably went to every
Popular Front
thing there was in the 1920s and 30s, because that's what people
Hitler
did.
was the enemy.
Yeah, right. So, well, so he had that baggage. So his security clearance was always subject to debate. If it had not been for Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, he would never have been there. I mean, because too many people was against him. They didn't want him there. And the fact that, you know, his brother didn't help, guilt by association and so on.
Right.
Now, which is ironic because both of them were sons of millionaires. I mean, they were very well off. They were rich. Okay, Teller didn't have a dime. He came over as a refugee. So that was always that big disparity there. So anyway, during the early 50s, we have the McCarthy era, witch hunts. They're looking for communists, they're trying to root them out. They did know, without a doubt, that Klaus Fuchs, who worked at Los Alamos, did betray the secrets to the Russians. There's no question about that.
But how do you pin that on Oppenheimer?
Well, Oppenheimer was the director of Los Alamos. Okay,
right.
So, well...
He had 6,000 people in Los Alamos.
Well, look, if you want to pin the tail on the donkey, you'll figure out a way to do it, okay? So, there was that. And
Guilt by association.
Yeah, guilt by association.
And he was investigated by J. Edgar Hoover way back in '41.
He was investigated by everybody.
And then the Congress said, we're gonna be spy hunter.
So that didn't help him any. Now, nobody ever really looked too much into Teller's background.
That's right.
And Teller's background in Europe was just as shady. I mean, he met with socialists, communists, and everybody else.
Right.
But hey, that's different. Well, anyway, you're getting up to 1954, and something big happened. I think we need to stress. Go back to 1952.
Right.
You have Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower did, when he became president, he had made overtures to Stalin, and he had told advisors that unless they came to an agreement with a truce, he might authorize the use of dropping atomic bombs in Korea. Now, he did that. He put it out there. And Eisenhower at that time, I'm convinced, even though he saw the films of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and by the way, my recently deceased uncle was one of the first Americans to fly into Hiroshima and look things around.
Wow.
And he came out rather impressed because there was really nothing to see. There was nothing there. Okay. And he had been with MacArthur's army all the way since 1942, gone to the Philippines and stuff. I mean, he saw everything that's horrible.
Right.
And that beat everything he ever saw. So anyway, up comes the idea, we're going to develop a hydrogen bomb. So the go-ahead is given. We start testing in the Pacific. We have our first test of a hydrogen bomb. It worked. So then they tried to figure out, well, how can we make one that's deliverable? So they started shrinking it, getting it smaller, and actually making it more powerful.
Right.
Well, in 1954, in a Weetok, Bikini, these two atolls are similar. They're right in the same vicinity. They did this nuclear test of a new hydrogen bomb, and the test was called Castle Bravo.
Right.
And the idea was they were going to detonate this hydrogen bomb on that little island over the horizon, okay? And now we have another observation island 15 miles away. That's where the scientists are in their bunker. And then 50 miles away we have the fleets and everything, and they're going to monitor this. And of course they're filming it all. It's all for scientific purposes. So they figured, okay, this thing is going to go, it's designed to explode at 5 million tons of TNT. Now, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was 20,000 tons. Okay, so we went from 20,000 tons to 5 million tons. Raw energy that's going to be detonated. Okay, well, we're safe. So they detonate that thing. The scientists are on the beach looking over the horizon, expecting to see the nice mushroom cloud come up like it should, and it did. But something was a little wrong because it didn't get smaller, it kept getting bigger. They had miscalculated with this device. And instead of 5 million tons of TNT, it registered 15 million tons. It was 3 times more powerful than they thought it was going to be. It was a horrible error. It blows that island off the face of the earth. It just turns it into a crater. The fallout goes up, and just by good old luck, a typhoon is blowing around, and it takes that radiation and it blows it up the Pacific 500 miles to a Japanese fishing fleet, irradiates them. I mean,
fallout, right.
The sailors said that they were watching the snow come down. It was ash. And Well, they thought, well, they're from Japan. There's volcanoes. They understand this sort of thing. But it was like nothing they had ever seen before. And then they started getting sick. And they got sicker and sicker. And they went back to port, and their port, and they're irradiated. It was fallout.
Right.
It irradiated the American fleet. We got hit by it too. Okay, but they were better off to prepare. They could, cure it. Now the poor guys stuck on the island, watching all this stuff go off, they were stranded. They couldn't pick those guys up for a week, and even then, they could only evacuate them by helicopter because they couldn't bring ships in that close. It was just too damn radioactive. Right. So they had to bring those men out that way, and a lot of them got radiation sickness and stuff. Well, okay, the point of all this is not the Japanese sailors that got sick. The Japanese were madder than hell about it. And the United States was at first go, no, it's not us. We didn't do anything like that. No, sirree, Bob. No, that's way down there. It can't possibly be that. I mean, Geiger counters are going off scale. They glow in the dark. But eventually they had to cough up. And they said, well, okay, we will admit no fault. Okay, that's not our fault, okay? But here's the compensation.
Yeah.
Here, take all this money and just shut up.
Yeah.
And we'll buy your boats too, because you can't use them anymore. So we did that. Well, anyway, Eisenhower sees these films of what happened. And they said at that point, he had sort of a change of heart when it came to nuclear weapons, the idea that you could use them in a limited capacity, okay? Which up to that point, I kind of think he thought, well, maybe we might have to drop a couple here and there, but we won't have more than a couple. But when he saw this come off, he realized, oh my God, this is we really do need to do something. And I think that's where Harold Stassen and that bunch started coming.
That's why he got appointed.
That's why he got appointed.
And Stevenson was talking about this in '52 in the campaign.
That's right. Yeah.
And he was saying we need a disarmament agency in the White House. Mm-hmm. Well, why did we still haven't got back to Oppenheimer?
Yeah.
Who removed his security and why?
He was his security was pulled by the Atomic Energy Commission. They pulled it off, and they said you are a security risk. We cannot trust you with our atomic secrets.
Right.
That was the reason given.
Right.
And at that point, he was essentially fired. Okay. He could no longer do any atomic research.
Now Kennan still believed in Oppenheimer, and he used to meet with Oppenheimer when they were both fired.
So did Groves.
So did Groves, right?
Yeah, Groves
and
testified.
Oppenheimer retires in the Virgin Islands and dies there. Mm-hmm. And Dean Acheson went to his funeral.
No kidding. That I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dean Acheson had faith in Oppenheimer. And he took Oppenheimer to Truman. And Oppenheimer blew it with Truman.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I don't want to see that guy again.
Yeah, it didn't
Don't bring him back.
No, Truman wasn't that...
he wasn't too sophisticated.
No, not at all. No. It might have worked with Roosevelt, but it wouldn't work with Truman.
That reminds me, Robert, you gave a speech one time in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
That's right.
What was that about?
Well, it was way after the Cold War. It was the Cold War was still propaganda, but I didn't believe the Cold War. Yeah. I wrote little articles saying the Cold War is a myth. Yeah. I could never get them published. I was a maverick. But in any case, there was a lady there who had married a physicist who worked with Oppenheimer, and this physicist died. And she was working on her PhD in history, and she wanted to teach history as a widow. And they had a program for adults now to get their PhD late in life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she put out a call to all historians, let's have an anniversary of the Los Alamos project, and you can give a speech. And there were a lot of doves who came there. Mm-hmm. And I gave a speech called The Myth of the Cold War. Okay. And I gave that speech. It was never published, although I have a brief article on the internet published by a maverick outfit. Yeah. But I gave the speech that the Cold War is a myth. Yeah. That title could not sell in any mass media publication.
No,
Now, when you,
I think that was in the late 60s. It was sort of like the,
now, when you were out here, I know Steve Grimes, Steve Grimes worked at
yeah,
Moore
right,
Lab.
right, right,
And he worked at Sandia
Right,
Lab in,
right.
In Albuquerque. Did you ever travel to Alamogordo?
No, I haven't been to, but I've been to Los Alamos.
drove by.
Yeah.
And-
Now, years ago, back in the 80s, I went out there to the White Sands National
Testing.
Monument.
Yeah, right.
And I remember, it was a pretty guarded place, even,
Well, yeah.
because I was able to camp out there,
Right,
but after you traveled out onto the
Right.
White Sands, they barricaded that place off.
right.
Nobody was going to drive in there after dark.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day I went back and I'd hiked some trails around there, and they said, well, I asked them if I could camp another night, and they said, no, we're going to conduct missile tests.
Good enough.
Yeah,
But they warn you about not picking any,
Right.
metal fragments up or anything like that. And then when you exit that area, I was sleeping in a tent. You had to shake out all the white sand and everything before they would allow you to go.
Yeah, there's fallout there.
Yeah, but
Well,
I just thought they allowed me to go up in the Oregon Mountains, I think they were called.
right.
And I think you can see Las Cruces there, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, but anyway, then after a couple days, they allowed me to return to White Sands, but they actually, the highway is Highway 70 that runs through there.
Yeah.
Not Interstate 70, it's New Mexico 70.
Uh-huh.
And they've got places there where they block the road off.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were going to work, I suppose in Alamogordo or whatever, you may have to wait several hours in order before
Right,
you can
right.
continue. But I just thought that was an interesting area.
Well, when I was at Los Alamos, they had a museum in the lodge. This was a hunting lodge originally. And they had all kinds of photographs of the bomb. And there were old veterans who had known Oppenheimer, and there were guys who had written books on disarmament. Most of them were historians. And they were all on Oppenheimer's side. I met no fan of Teller.
No.
What do you suppose that was?
Teller was just a jerk. I mean, he was just a.
These people wanted the end of the Cold War.
Yeah, he was a lousy person.
Yeah.
He was a bully. It was either his way or the highway, and if he got in his way, he wouldn't hesitate to crush a person. He made no friends. There was no. You don't find anybody says, "Yeah, I went out with Ed and we got drunk and had a great old time." There's no such thing. No, not at all. He was just he was so egocentric.
Yeah.
It was just his way,
Yeah.
and. Apparently, he pleased enough of the people in charge of building nuclear weapons to keep his job. But
How is it did our science program hear about him in Hungary, or had he come over here?
he was a
and
refugee.
presented himself?
Yeah, he came.
Okay.
Yeah, he got out of Hungary,
I
but
see.
because it was going fascist.
Yeah.
Okay, he's a Jew.
Right.
Okay, they don't want him there.
Right.
So he's getting out. I
Okay,
mean,
I
he's smart. He knows that what's going to happen. So he was a lot of the Hungarian Jews that came over to America as refugees. I'm trying to think of the other one that's developed most of the theory behind computers. What was his name?
Szilard?
No, Szilard, again, a Hungarian Jew. He was the one that actually authored the letter that Einstein signed that was sent to Roosevelt to get the Manhattan Project going.
So Leo Szilard became a dove before Oppenheimer did.
Oh yeah.
He wouldn't work on the project. He said, "This is Einstein. This is the end of the world."
Yeah. Well, actually, Szilard did. He worked on the Manhattan Project up to the point where they tested the bomb. Okay, and he was among many of the scientists there. It's split at Los Alamos. Okay, we know the bomb works. do we need to drop it on the Japanese to convince them to surrender? Could we not do a demonstration?
Yeah.
You know, we could invite Japanese representatives to someplace, detonate this thing, they could go back and tell that. And he was among that group.
Yeah.
But Oppenheimer was with the group that says, no, the only way you're going to really convince the Japanese or any enemy that the atomic bomb is a real weapon is you're going to have to drop it on a city.
You know, I would think maybe that demonstration would have worked.
I don't think so.
You don't think it would?
No, because don't forget there were two demonstrations over Japan. One was at Nagasaki, the other was at Hiroshima. It still took 2 weeks for the Japanese government to come around to say, I think it's time to surrender.
Kamikazes and the army. The army was against it.
Yes, absolutely.
The army were fanatics.
Yeah.
Suicide is the only honor.
Now, George Marshall...
Now, the Navy would have surrendered. The Japanese Navy wanted to surrender.
Yeah. George Marshall, who was the chief of staff, he was looking at the invasions of Kyushu, the smaller island at the south. That's where MacArthur was going to go in there first, then hit Honshu later. But Kyushu, they said, okay, has this many divisions, we'll need this many troops, and that's what we'll be able to take it. Intelligence reports were coming after they had hit Hiroshima. And the reason that Hiroshima was picked, other than the fact that it was a city that hadn't been bombed much, was it was the headquarters of the Japanese army in Kyushu. They figured, well, knock out the headquarters, it's going to have an effect.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it did. I mean, they drove the headquarter building at Hiroshima was a reinforced concrete tower that was 10 stories high. The atomic bomb detonated about 1,200 yards away from it at 2,800 feet. Yeah. The concussion wave, not the heat, but the concussion, hit that building and drove it down like a pile driver into the soft mud of that city and buried it. Wow. Just pushed it down. You could excavate around it and find the building was still intact. It just simply squeezed it down.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, here's the point. The point was, there were not 8 divisions there anymore. Now there were 16. The Japanese were actually reinforcing the island. Because they said, well, okay, if you hit it twice with atomic bombs, that must mean you're going to invade there, right? Well, yeah. So Marshall was saying, okay, how many atomic bombs do we have in our inventory right now? Well, we had just used 2. 2 more were being produced. They had got the plutonium bomb down. See, that was the big thing. Nagasaki was the plutonium bomb. Yeah. There was only 1 uranium bomb in existence in the whole world. We used it on Hiroshima. It was going to take another year to build another one. But plutonium bombs, we could build 2, 6, 10 a month. Just how do you want to gear it up? We can make as many as you want. We can kick these things out like peanuts. So he said, okay, I need 8. I want 8 more bombs dropped on Kyushu. Here's the targets. They're all military targets. This is where their armies are. Hit them before we invade. And then they go, well, George, if you put that many plutonium bombs on that island, you're going to irradiate the place. Right. It's not going to be safe for Americans to even invade because there's going to be all this fallout. Well, fallout was this concept they couldn't get their heads around. They just simply could not understand the point. How could that be? It made no sense. And here you have these scientists saying, listen, you irradiate something and it dies. Right. And they're going, yeah, but...
They think it's going to...
It's just a bigger TNT bomb.
Yeah.
Just a big TNT bomb.
Yeah. So probably using the word TNT was probably not the right choice of words, well, okay, it's just a bigger bomb. It's just a bigger explosive. No, it's a whole different kettle of fish. So
yeah, you have to read John Hersey. That's a novelist. But he got down to the gut feeling, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know where we're at here.
Okay, well, I think we'll just have to finish up here a little bit on Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Oppenheimer was investigated 3 times, 41, and then he was finally investigated in 54.
Yep.
And they kept taking away his security clearance.
Right. Yep.
And he, as I say, he died in 1967. Mm-hmm. He married he had a flirt with 2 different women.
Yep.
And they were both kind of tied to the communists. And that made him suspect.
Of course.
He had a loose sex life, okay. So anyway, he married one of them. He married Catherine, and the other one, he got but he was still going out with both of them after he got married.
Well,
So he was a little bit before his time as far as that. Well, anyway, he died in 1967. George Kennan came, and David Lilienthal came. But by and large, Teller and a lot of the other Hawks didn't come.
oh, no, no.
So he died a kind of, but he's now a nuclear hero from my point of view.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, I made up my mind when I read Einstein. Einstein said, I don't know who's going to win World War III, but World War IV is going to be with sticks and stones.
Stones, yes.
And then I went to Oxford in 1957, and that's when they were talking about overkill. 57.
Yeah.
That's when they were talking about radioactive fallout.
Yeah.
And I met a veteran there, a guy by the name of Hanna, Mark Hanna. He was a veteran of World War
Robert,
II.
we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I guess we'll finish with Mark Hanna, and we'll continue
Excuse my
here
cough.
with the retirement of Oppenheimer, and we can kind of summarize what we've discussed so far, and we'll have to continue with this in another show. Thank you very much for coming, and we have to keep the debate going.
Absolutely.
There is a nuclear debate, a political debate, and a military debate on tactics. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.